rich and rare land. This week, Tara of the Kings and the church that tells visitors the ancient tales of history and mythology. In the nearby town of Trim, its castle stands guard by the River Boyne, as it has done since the 12th century. There's a monument to Wellington of Waterloo, while close by, in the town of Kells, are buildings that commemorate earlier times, even a house of St. Columkill. All these are part of Royal Meath and this rich and rare land. One of the burial mounds on the hill of Tara towers Noree. And what better place to start a programme about Royal Meath than here? Because this place had associations with one of the most illustrious periods in ancient Irish history. It's associated with the names of the great leaders and kings, Conn of the 100 Battles, Cormac Mac Art, Finn McCool and the Fianna, Grania, agus Diarmuid, the great love story with the coming of St. Patrick in the year 432. These strange-looking concentric banks and ditches, with the sheep grazing the green fields all about them, mark one of the sites of habitation, ritual and burial on the hill of Tara from away back in the mists of time. It was indeed a rich and rare land then, with thousands of acres of fertile pasture spreading about it on all sides, and that at a time when wealth was counted in cattle. Those were the times when the harp that once through Tara's halls the soul of music shed.
The harp that once through Tara's halls the soul of music shed. Now
the school tours and visiting groups coming here are often a little surprised, perhaps a little disappointed even, by the fact that there isn't really very much to see at Tara. But this has been made up for in recent years by a splendid new addition to the site, one which sheds light upon what Tara was like in its heyday and why it was a place of such eminence in the life of ancient Ireland. That there was the St. Patrick's Church of Ireland in Tara and functioned as such up to 3 years ago. It is now the Tara Visitor Centre. And here, day by day, certainly throughout the tourist months, come thousands of visitors looking at the splendid audiovisual show telling the story of Tara, its kings, queens, princes, druids and warriors down through the centuries. Before the audiovisual show proper, and while the hall is filling up, an introductory talk is given by one of the guides. The magic which abounds in Tara is reflected in these young eyes. There's no problem in getting and holding our attention here.
They left the window and all of the furniture.
The familiar stained glass window of the old church quickly yields pride of place to the audiovisual magic of the goddess Maeve, about to seduce the king with her wine cup. On one occasion, the legend has it, this haughty damsel assumed the high kingship of Tara herself until a suitable male candidate could be found. The two standing stones, Bloch agus Blaigine, which magically opened a passage before the young king-elect, as the screech of his chariot wheels against him and the Lia Foil, the stone of destiny, proclaimed for all the world to hear that he was king. The paschal fire on the hill of Slane, lit by Patrick and his monks, and visible from Tara, where the druids of the High King foresaw in it the dawn of a new faith in Ireland. The tragic story of Diarmuid agus Grania, daughter of King Cormac, betrothed to the aging Finn, but in love with his young captain, the handsome Diarmuid O'Dina, whom she lured away to follow her to death and destruction. All these stories are told in an audiovisual show in the tastefully restored old church. The whole thing adds greatly to the visitor's understanding of the importance of Tara in the Irish story, which, until it was established, the place did rather lack, as I told the chief guide there, Gerard Clark. When I first came up here to Tara many years ago now, I remember being disappointed. There seemed to be nothing here but the grass and the mounds. Is that at all a right or a wrong impression?
It's a wrong impression. There's lots to see here, and we have lots of people still coming with the idea that you had in your early days, perhaps, that there wasn't much to see. because of the recent explorations and more intensive study of the histories, we can now tell you lots about the Hill of Tara. And using the audiovisual show that we have here in the church, it's a very interesting place. There's a wealth of knowledge now about the prehistoric period when the Neolithic people built their mounds on the site and used it for burials. Then, of course, the High Kings were here for their crowning ceremonies. And in more recent times, with the arrival of the Christians in Ireland, we had the development of a Christian site here on the hill. Tara then is full of sights to see, and the services that we provide here in the church is a great way of learning initially about it. And of course, with the guide service that we have, we can bring you out and show you on the site exactly what there is.
What about the audiovisual show? Is that making a big impression with visitors?
It's funny, it depends on the groups that come here. We have lots and lots of school children coming here, and the scenes from the mythologies, from the legends and the stories really impress them. Other people, for the first time, can see the hill itself, all of the structures from the air, from Con Brogan's photographs in the air, and of course, that's the best way to see Tara. The aerial shots are impressive, to say the least. Tara is covered with monuments that are so big that when you walk around it on the ground, you cannot take them into context. They're nearly too big to be seen.
How about numbers? Are you satisfied with the number of people coming here?
Numbers are great, actually. From our first year, we've had about 18,000 visitors a year during the last 3 years, which is quite high. And the audiovisual is a great vehicle, a great way of showing people all those things that they cannot afford to do, cannot afford to hire helicopters perhaps or something like that. And so we're delighted with the numbers. And they seem to be increasing slightly all the time. And this year we would hope to have between 20 and 25,000 visitors to the hill.
What's your ultimate hope now for Tara?
I think, along with everybody else from both the locality and people who have been visiting here from all over Ireland and all over the world, they would love to see Tara itself, the hill itself, left in its natural state, the way it is at the moment. It's a beautiful hillside. It has the wonderful air of mystery about it and magic. We wouldn't like to interfere with that in any way. And we would use the existing church itself to improve the facilities for the visitors without interfering with the hillside.
Gerard Clark, Chief Guide at Tara. Good meet a Haslaughter.
Fáiltear.
Fair Tara, Ireland's noble hill, home of kings and princes, green sward where heroes rest until the heavenly host arises.
Just a few miles from Tara is the heritage town of Trim, which has its own not inconsiderable claim to fame as party to the title Royal Meath. Imposing castle walls running beside the main streets and dominating the centre of what is after all but a small town. One might well ask, how come that this was a place of such importance? 20th century scaffolding on the side of a 12th century castle here in Trim in County Meath. The castle is in course of reconstruction at the moment, but it's been standing there since the year 1172 when Hugh de Lacy, the great Norman baron, set it up. He was known rightly as the King of Meath, and he chose the place deliberately because this was the highest point on the Boyne which was navigable the whole way up from Drogheda. Hence he was able to control by water access to this whole wide countryside. The restoration work now in progress will place the massive bulk of the great castle at the centre of Trim's heritage, telling the story of the power and the glory of the medieval town, where kings and princes came and Norman knights in armour jousted. From inside these walls, on horseback or by water, they set off for foreign parts to do battle for cross and king of the Crusades in Jerusalem. Men whose names were familiar in the courts of England and of France. Men of culture and prestige. Soldiers of renown from Ireland to the distant Middle East. It all started with Hugh de Lacy, an astute Norman who knew that there could be no real conquest without conciliation.
He went to great trouble to conciliate those who had been conquered and forcibly ejected from their lands. When he had won their support, he enticed them still further to his side by his mild rule and by making agreements on which they could rely.
Some of the foundations of this cathedral church date from those early Norman times. It's thought to be on the site of the first Christian church in the area, founded by St. Loman, a nephew of St. Patrick, in the year 433. A discerning and fair-minded churchman, commenting on the ecclesiastical life of Meath, would write,
Many of our mainline churches have stains on their history, and that is as true of the Church of Ireland as of any other church. Most churches have been persecuted, or have been persecutors in some degree, yet all of us share shining examples of holiness and courage in witness to Jesus Christ. For example, our own Anglican forefathers shared the sufferings of our Roman Catholic brethren at the hands of Oliver Cromwell, both in Ireland and in England.
Set in the walls of the porch are some ancient gravestones bearing the crests and insignia of old Norman families, those knights in armour jousting within the walls of Trim Castle and coming to worship here in a church reputed to be older than the Armagh of Patrick or England's Canterbury. A tall column standing out against the skyline in a small town like Trim tells at a glance that someone of importance is being commemorated. A man, incidentally, who as Chief Secretary for Ireland saw our only hope in Catholic and Protestant learning to work in harmony together. But why Trim? This lovely old house was once the property of Dean Swift. It was in its time a holy abbey, it was a strong fortress, and it was a school. As a school, it had some interesting pupils. One of them was Rowan Hamilton, the mathematician and astronomer, who used to look at the stars from one of its windows. Another of its pupils was Arthur Wellesley, who was a boy around these parts. He, of course, became the Duke of Wellington and defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. Some few years later, he put his cannon behind him and, as Prime Minister of England, put through the Bill on Catholic Emancipation. The antiquities of Trim are reproduced in these murals in the entrance hall to the Duchess Trim Folk Theatre, which, with local talent, puts on a delightful show throughout the tourist season based on folk traditions from the life of Meath. The Meath Heritage Centre in Trim tells, in pictorial and graphic terms, the story of those armoured knights clad in the robes of chivalry and prancing within the castle walls of the kingly Hugh the Lacy, the power and the glory of Trim in medieval times. But ordinary life went on within the walls as well as outside them, while all these great events were happening. This graphic tells the story of that higgledy-piggledy workaday life. Ordinary folk going about ordinary jobs, the plain people watching while the knights jousted, cattle ferried to new pasture, boy meets girl in the cornfield while, hopefully, the family works on, a tonsured monk in pursuit of God, and another in more trivial pursuits. But trivial is not the word for this highly successful brother and sister-run enterprise on the edge of town. How did it all start, Babs?
In 1971, we were both made redundant in an envelope factory in Trim that we both worked in for some years. And when we were made redundant, we decided that we weren't going to emigrate. And we pooled our redundancy, which was very, very small at the time, and started with 6 people at the time in an old disused mill in the centre of the town.
There was no factory here then?
No, there was just a green field, and we bought the site off the county council.
So, Sonny, how has it gone for you?
Well, it has gone very well, actually. From the time we started with 6 people, we now employ 100 people. And we're from a situation where we had a turnover about £8,000 in the first year. Our turnover now is 8 million. And we're producing now approximately 750 million envelopes per year. And things are going very well at the moment.
What would you be saying to somebody who, in these times, got his redundancy money and was thinking of emigrating, perhaps thinking of starting his own business. How would you say to him to proceed?
Well, I think he would definitely need a bit of courage to start out on his own. He would definitely need a bit of courage and know what he's about, and be prepared to put a lot of hours. I think hours is more important really than money at the start, because from our end of it, we've up 16, maybe 20 hours a day. So anyone starting out would have to have a bit of courage and a fair bit of nerve and put their shoulder into it and work plenty long hours and be prepared to do that, you know.
Would there be success at the end of that?
I think if you work hard enough, you will get there.
Is he being over-optimistic? Is the courage to make a start, which he spoke about, the willingness to put in long hours of hard work, the determination not to take the redundancy money and the social welfare, do no more about it, are these things which are common in the life of Ireland now? Or are they the property of that rare few who are what's known as lucky enough to succeed? But then, do the courage, the willingness, the determination not actually make the luck? These are some of the burning questions of our time. This broken Celtic cross to one side of the main street in Kells in Royal Meath is a reminder of some of the burning questions of another time in the life of Ireland. The nearby Round Tower confirms that this was a monastic settlement of some importance, long centuries before the old church buildings of our time were even dreamt of. The Celtic cross was in its time a kind of picture storybook used for the instruction of the faithful in the Gospel and Bible stories.
A Isavoin id lahur yod, ag cuid vosh san ard chrashwor. O ish gobos ag tal na nyor, ag muiv mogra dam lani hoer. O lani hoer.
O Jesus bright, the high cross light upon my soulful vision, I sing in praise down all the days, my loving Saviour's passion.
One of the 5 Celtic crosses within the walls of the ancient monastic settlement at Kells in County Meath. This was a pretty important place in the monastic life of early Christian Ireland. We all know about the world-famous Book of Kells. That may not have been the Book of Kells at all. It may have been the Book of Iona. But when the Vikings came to plunder Iona, the monks of Columcille came back here to Ireland, brought their lovely book back to this place, and hence it became the Book of Kells. One of the most remarkable remains of the monastery of Kells is this Columcille's house on a high point above the town. It was built, some say, to house the remains of the saint brought back by the monks when they fled the Viking raids on Iona. Columcille is claimed by Derry, by Iona, by Durrow. But there's something about this place which specially evokes the spirit of Ireland's first exile.
How can I live and hear your cry? My exile blinds me, tears in my eyes. A broken heart within me cries with love and grief for Derry.
This tall tower, rising above the fields outside the town, has no Columban significance. Almost a lighthouse in a bog, brilliant but useless. Its building in 1791 was designed to help provide work during an early famine. In the park around it is the pauper's graveyard, used during the Great Famine of 1847, when the dead were brought to be buried there by a bypass road. Like those famine victims of Rwanda in more recent times, to stop disease spreading throughout the town. Members of the Kells Heritage Trust come together here for a meeting in the grounds of St. Columba's Church, comprise all the diverse strands which are working for the betterment of the town. Their intention is to pull them all together in a single concerted effort. Local councillor Francis Monaghan is the Heritage Trust Secretary. We all know the name of Kells from our ancient history books. What is its importance?
I think the importance of Kells goes right back to about the 5th century, Liam. That's where the first Christian settlements, that's when they first started. And ever since that, in the annals and in the history books, right down to the present day, you read of references to Kells and to its various monuments, the artefacts, all the different things we've got here. I suppose that its main importance really goes back to the Book of Kells. And the Book of Kells, of course, is at present in Trinity College, and some of us in Kells would like to say, well, we think perhaps one day it ought to be brought back here, but that's another day's work. But that is perhaps one of the most famous of all the things that are relevant to Kells at the moment, you know, down through the years. The other things that are important in Kells, I think, are the beauty of the town itself, and the fact that when you look along the streets and the streetscapes, it mirrors the history of many, many different periods, not just the present day, not just the 9th century, but right the way through in between.
So I'm a foreigner, I'm a stranger, I'm a tourist in Kells. What would I expect to see now around the town and in the monastery here?
Well, in the monastery, we have one of the largest, in fact, I think it's the largest collection of Celtic crosses in the world. We have 5. 4 of them in very good condition and 1 of them slightly broken. Now that is an even bigger collection than they have in Clonmacnoise, for example. We also have sort of an old, sort of what you might call a rectory or an old hermitage called St. Columkill's House, which again was started in the 9th century. Very, very old, and in fact it often reminds me when I look at it of the Galleries Oratory. It's very beautiful and very, very thick walls, and it's unique in the Western world.
So
then we have a perfectly preserved round tower as well.
So what are you heritage people doing about contemporary Kells?
Well, we have a very long agenda and a big programme of work ahead of us. There are several things we'd like to do. First of all, of course, we started organising the festivals of Kells, which have been held now over the last 3 years. But we have a much more long-term plan than that. We were very fortunate in getting Kells listed on the list of 30 heritage towns, which is quite an achievement. And being a heritage town means that a great deal of funding later on comes into the town. It means that we can do a great deal. Not only can we promote tourism, but we can do a lot to benefit the town for the people actually living there. There are a great many organisations in Kells who have been, you know, conscious of the importance and of the appearance of Kells right from the very beginning. For instance, I'm thinking of the Tidy Towns Committee, which started in the 60s. You have the Meath Archaeological and Historical Society, you have the Enterprise Group, and you have the Heritage Trust and Heritage Festival Committee. So you have a body of groups there, really. And I think that one of our aims would be to bring them all together so that we can work together and really achieve our aims. One of the other things we would like to do too would be that the whole concept of being a heritage town would be relevant to everybody living in it. We can gain from the experience, the positive experiences of other towns who have also become heritage towns, and we can develop not only the tourism end of it, but also see that quite a lot of the heritage funding is put towards improving the environment that people live in. You know, it's not sufficient just to have your town lovely for tourists. We think it should be lovely for the people who are actually living in it. For instance, you know, there's no point in having a lot of tourism amenities if you're falling across the pavements as you go down, you know, to see them, and you've got to have nice pavements, nice streetscapes, safe traffic, a safe environment for people to live.
For the tourist at least, that environment, no different here from France or anywhere else, is the Routard, or hostel for the student and backpacker, with not too much money to spend. Kells Hostel, near the old monastic ruins, supplies that very necessary and, fortunately for the young, very economic service. Southborough, one of the industries of Kells, has more than doubled its workforce over the past 3 years. It's a precision engineering company providing a total manufacturing service which, according as products and production methods change, can adapt more rapidly to the new demands than any of its competitors. The company aims to be a world-class supplier with top-quality design and assembly, delivering high-quality work on time all the time. It was one of the first in Ireland to adopt the JIT and ISO 9000 standards, and this is now accepted as the norm. Work like this in a small factory in the small town of Kells is the kind of thing needed to bring new jobs and with them new hope. The nearby Kells Stainless is another example of how good, thriving industry can start with very, very little. Now one of Ireland's leading suppliers of stainless steel containers to the chemical, pharmaceutical, dairy, food and drinks industries. It began a few short years ago with the old familiar story of redundancy caused by a big company rationalisation plan. The founders of Kell Stainless had the necessary expertise from their former job, and they had their redundancy money, but they had little else. The courage to make a start and the will to stick with it until it was a success, that did the rest. Could the same happen elsewhere? Repeatedly throughout this series of programmes, we've seen the proof that indeed it can. We started here on the hill of Tara, and I think it's right that we should finish here, because Tara was a place that's made an illustrious mark upon the life of ancient Ireland. And as we see in Royal Meath, County Meath itself is making a contribution nowadays to the life of contemporary Ireland. And in its way, both Tara and the whole of County Meath, then and now, is part of what may yet make a rich and rare land.